Welcome to the Startups Without Borders podcast. I'm Valentina Primo, a journalist who fell in love with the Middle East, spent 6 years telling its startup stories, and now founded Startups Without Borders. Each week, we'll be sharing inspiring interviews with the most audacious startup founders while highlighting resources for anyone starting up. These are the tools to bring out the legend in you. You're listening to the Startups Without Borders podcast, episode 2. Today, we speak to Aline Serra. Aline comes from Lebanon, a country that hosts the largest percentage of refugees per capita. So it's no coincidence that this brilliant woman is the power force behind Natakallem, a social startup that not only employs refugees, but also valorizes their skills, completely disrupting the way we think of humanitarianism. On this episode, we'll delve into the building of this global community of language partners, while getting insider tips on how to identify partners, secure smart collaborations, and drive users. Aline, I'm very, very excited to have you on the podcast today. I remember hearing about Natakallem back in 2013, was it?
2015.
2015, right. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm very excited to hear all about the story and all about your secrets to partner.
Thank you for having me, Valentina. It's an honor to be featured on your podcast, which I think is just the starting first episode.
Yeah, we're launching the first season now. And we wanted to start with a little bit of history of how Natakallem was created and what inspired you. I mean, you were born in the US, got back to Lebanon when you were studying. So tell me a little bit about how that mix of both worlds transformed into this game-changing startup.
Yeah, I mean, so just, myself, from originally, my parents are Lebanese. They lived in Lebanon. They were here at the time of the Civil War, and they actually had moved to New York for my father's medical studies, and that was the height of the Civil War. And they were lucky because back then they were able to actually stay in the U.S., right? So it's interesting to compare today what we're seeing, and if today was then, my parents would have probably been official refugees trying to look for, asylum somewhere. So I was born in New York to Lebanese parents, and I grew up in New York. But my parents were really wonderful at making sure we stayed close to our origins and to our roots. So we would fly back to Lebanon every summer to visit the family when the conflict wasn't too strong. Yeah. So I grew up very attached to my homeland, my country of origin. And it kind of shaped the kind of narrative of I think, who I became later on, which was someone who actually grew to be very interested in issues related to human rights, social justice, conflict resolution, etc. And also someone who's been exposed to travel in multiple languages. And so even though I grew up speaking French and a bit of Arabic at home, Arabic really took the backseat because, of course, in New York, I was speaking English as well. So Arabic had also always been a language that I struggled with historically. Yeah. So basically it was a result of kind of this upbringing and this interest in social justice and languages, and my experience in Lebanon, because I moved back to Beirut in 2000, it was 2008, and then I was back and forth, and I spent 4 years total here, and I worked as a journalist, and I was here during the Arab uprisings and the resulting refugee crisis. And so I saw hands-on, first, up close and personal, the situation for all of these Syrians in Lebanon, and especially Syrians like me who were robbed from a future and robbed from any hope because they are refugees here in Lebanon, and they, either they have to leave or, they will never be able to work in their line of work if they're in the middle class professions, for example, architects, engineers. I think I might have gone off to too much, or have I answered the question, or should I?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Actually, I'm super inspired by that. And I know that you've been working in the field of human rights so much. I mean, you've kind of went between journalism and peace building, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting mix of things that influenced me. I studied conflict resolution, media communications during my master's, and also before my master's, that's when I was a journalist. And when I was a journalist in Lebanon, my focus was social, political affairs and human rights. Yeah. And then even before that, I did do work that was specifically conflict mediation and conflict resolution. And my bachelor's is in psychology, actually. So psychology and with a minor in philosophy. So really looking at things from the psychological perspective has been a key and kind of constant in my work, and what interests me. And I would say that for me, it was really putting myself in the shoes of Syrians who were just like me when they got to Lebanon. And you're literally looking at, there's no options for you, because, I mean, you either try to get to Europe through the dangerous migrant route, or you hope that you'll be the 1% of refugees who will be legally resettled to places where you can actually start your life again, right? So I think, unfortunately, with the media and the politics, we're so far from really understanding what people who have been forced to flee their homes are dealing with. Yeah. And so, I think that for me, just because I was in Lebanon, and also with my background, and also looking at the grander picture of things, because Lebanon itself has endured a 15-year civil war. We're also, we had a war in 2006. We're a country that is very kind of on a constant, like, will there be a war kind of, we live that way, right? So also studying a lot about what is it that pushes people to fight or to take up arms. And so I had also read a lot on radicalization, a lot on peace and conflict. And so, for example, it's very interesting. Recently, we came across a poll by the British Council. They did this research on what pushes people to fight. And I was impressed, because the number one reason, according to this poll, which was by the British Council, and I could pull up the exact information, or we can share it on your website eventually afterwards, is the lack of opportunity to provide for oneself and one's family. So it's not fear, it's not, radicalization in and of itself. That's, people are looking for opportunities, and that's what unites us all ultimately. We all want to be able to feed our children, to have a future, to have prospects. So, kind of putting all these factors into play, like thinking of, what it must be like for these highly educated individuals, Syrians in this context, because I was focusing on Syrians in Lebanon, thinking about Lebanon as this area that is, not too far from being able to, become another conflict zone and relive another war due to sectarianism. So really kind of putting all those things together and thinking, I also want to make sure Lebanon stays safe, but how can you have stability when you have 1 million people come into your country and you don't give them a way to survive? And many factors pushed me to kind of think of, we need to find a way. And that's when the answer was, I understand why the Lebanese are concerned about giving all the Syrians jobs, because the Lebanese are struggling to get jobs. So what can we do that won't affect the Lebanese and their opportunities and is outside of the local economy? And that's when we thought, language learning through the internet and through the freelance economy. And that's like this kind of, this new way of looking at things. Right. And that was also probably a result of myself traveling a lot, using Skype all the time. So yeah, those are kind of the different, different fields and things that, came into play. And of course, my experience working on Arabic and being a journalist here, being surrounded by humanitarians, foreigners who are all studying Arabic, and yet what they studied for the most part in the US was Fusha. And so it was the very funny, amusing thing of seeing all these foreigners who have amazing Fusha, which is modern standard Arabic, which is the language that unites all 22 Arab League states, but is actually not the language people actually speak in the street, right? So when people would take a cab and be with a foreigner and they speak with the Lebanese taxi driver, and they speak in this kind of Shakespearean language, right? Because the formal Arabic sounds very heavy. Just knowing how frustrating that was for the people learning Arabic to realize that they learned a language that they can't communicate in. And that's what was the original idea of Natakallam. It was that Syrians can be your language partners to help you learn the dialect and for you to talk to the people. And that's what so many aid workers and foreigners and journalists are interested in. And so that was kind of also part of how I came up with the idea for Natakallam, which on the one end is access to income for refugees and displaced people. It's a very dignifying way to make an income because you're teaching your language. And it's also a way for language learners to practice the, Arabic dialect. And also get to hear the story of refugees, because it's only if we actually hear stories from individuals that I think we can be sensitive and motivated to support them, because I don't think the news really leads us to that, unfortunately, and especially the way the news and the politicians talk about refugees. So it was like a two-way, two double markets, double needs, language learners and refugees.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, right? Because you're adding so much value. It's not just the language experience. It's not just the learning aspect. It's the fact that you can get in touch with someone, a real person with a real story that is living the realities of the Middle East. I remember, myself, when I moved to the Middle East to study Arabic, I first started with standard Fusha. And of course, in the street, people would think I talk like a cartoon, or, I talk a very funny Arabic, and it doesn't help you connect with the people. And I think the beauty of learning a new language is basically the ability to build that bridge, right? And to communicate with another mentality, with another mindset.
Yeah, and I would even add that, one other thing I was thinking of is myself, I had been a tutor for French. An informal, I taught French and English and vice versa. And in the one-on-one setting versus a classroom setting, you really develop an incredible friendship with your language partner. Yeah. And there was that component of it also, because, I think communicating is and getting to know people on a deeper level. And that is one of the things we hear from our students that they love so much. They we have a testimony from one of our students who says she worked for the UNHCR, she studied migration, and she's been in the field of refugees, but it wasn't until she did Natakallam with her language partner, who she said invited her into her home via Skype with her language classes on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, that she actually realized what it is to be someone who's had to leave your home and to restart your life. And especially when you are a Syrian refugee in today's context, because being a Syrian refugee, I think, has an added layer of difficulty in our political climate today.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the most surprising parts is how you grew this community into more than just a company or a startup, but into a movement, basically. What was the process of getting those first users? In a platform like yours that is, that has a double-sided market, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg situation, right? Where do you go first? Do you go to the language learners? Do you go to the language partners? And how did you secure all those users?
Yeah, Natakallam came to life very organically. I'd never, ever in my life thought I'd start a startup. Yeah. That was never part of my interests. I come from the journalism, human rights, very interested in story and social change. Though social impact is part of social change, of course. Yeah. But I didn't even know that startups could be for good back then. I associated startups with, very for-profit driven tech companies. So it was really funny how things happened. But it was just, for me, it was a very, I came up with the idea for Natakallam when I was in New York City and I had finished my master's and I wanted to work on my Arabic. And so all the different factors that I explained to you earlier, I had like a light bulb idea. I'm like, if at first I thought if only I were in Lebanon instead of New York and I wanted to work on my Arabic, and I would, work with Syrians, have them be my tutors and my language partners, because anyways, I had always wanted to go to Damascus for Arabic. Yeah. But then I was in New York and then I was like, but wait, I can also use Skype. So it was this idea I had, and I let it rest for several months because, I actually, the funny story is I called my brother up, and my brother is a total business background. He went to business school, and we have a funny joke in the family. He's the business guy. I'm kind of the hippie, save the world. And then my younger brother is the artist musician. But I called him up and I told him, I was joking. I was literally joking. I'm like, I have a startup idea. And I was laughing at myself. And I'm like, I think that we can create this program where people who want to learn Arabic can be connected to Syrian refugees.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I don't know, maybe, I don't know how people feel about learning from refugees. They might have this idea. And so you could already see that kind of the idea people have of refugees kick in already just in that second, right? That people don't realize that refugees are teachers, refugees are architects, refugees are just like you and me. So they're, but, and then he told me, you know what, Aline, do your market research, study what's out there, see what are the competitors. And I do your market analysis. And I never heard that word in my life before. And so he said that to me and I'm like, okay, what am I getting myself into? This is so far from where I come from. And I hung up and I laughed and I'm like, khalas, as we say in Arabic, I'll forget this idea. It was fun. And then 5 months later, I got an email from Columbia University, which is where I did my master's. And they were announcing their annual, very large startup competition. And it's open to alumni. And it was in 5 different areas. And that's when I saw that one of the areas was the public sector and that you can be a for-profit, non-profit, hybrid startup. And, I'm telling you, Valentina, that's how little I knew about the sector. I was like, wow, you can pitch an idea that's like a non-profit idea, like for good. So I decided to pitch the idea. And then the idea got to the next level. We got feedback from the judges. And I was like, wow, there's actually someone who thinks I have a good idea for a business, which was, wow, for me was. And then 2 months later, we applied to a World Bank competition for the MENA region, so women entrepreneurs based in the Arab world. And that competition led us to the finals. And to become considered for the finals, we actually had to go from idea phase to actual pilot. And so this was the summer of 2015. And we connected with a local Lebanese NGO. And we started, so the first thing we did was actually reach out to my network of friends in the journalism sector, humanitarian NGOs, myself and my co-founders. At the time, we were 3. And we were all graduates from Columbia School of International and Public Affairs. So that was kind of all of our network. And so we were in a space of people who are interested in the Middle East, interested in probably language learning. So we first reached out to them to assess whether they would consider learning Arabic with Syrian refugees over Skype. We tried to assess a bit the pricing. And then we went to the local NGO and we connected with Syrians there who we told about the project. And then we did the first pilot where students were invited to pay a discounted rate and start. And so we did our first pilot and we were tiny. We had 6 Syrians and 12 students. So each one was paired with 2 students for a couple of first sessions. And, we didn't win that competition because it was, we were so young and, most competitions, I think, tend to endorse companies that have proven themselves much more robustly. Yeah. So, but I decided, as much as I was disappointed, I was just watching the news and, this was 2015. So if you remember 2015 in the summer, that's when the world woke up to the refugee crisis, right? Yeah. That is when the photo of Elan Kurdi went viral, and people realized, there's actually a really serious crisis going on in the Middle East, triggered by the Syrian conflict. And so what I decided to do, and it was a little bit before Elan Kurdi's photo went viral, but I was just myself so convinced that I should keep pushing because I feel that there's a value to what I'm doing and to what we're doing at Natakalam. So I started to write to friends of mine and ask them, can you please share about our website, share the Natakalam website, because by then we had created a website. And it was impressive. So after 3 days, people started sharing the website. And I think there was one key blogger who had a huge following, and he shared it. And it got like in a couple of days, we had probably 6,000 shares of our website. And the following week, we had 300 students who'd sign up to take sessions.
Right.
And it was that same week that Elon, and I forget what happened first, but it was all around the same time. And then the next thing I knew, I believe it was you from when you were with Barakovitz that wrote to us, and then the Huffington Post.
Right.
And that's kind of what launched us. So it was, timing was key in our launch because there was an interest around the Syrian refugee crisis. There's been a constant steady flow of interest in innovations in the humanitarian space as of recently, the tech space, et cetera. So I would say that that's how we got our first following and our first users. And ever since, we got a lot of press coverage that was very helpful. And now it's less organic because we've been out there for a while, but we still are very active on social media, and we also do, of course, B2B and direct outreach.
Right. I think your startup is one of the cases where timing is everything, right? You popped up at the right exact moment when the whole world woke up to the refugee crisis, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how was it like to basically moderate a community that is on the other corner of the world? I mean, you were building and moderating at the same time this community of refugees that were across different countries, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so, I travel a lot. I do go back and forth between, New York and Paris, where my co-founder is, and Lebanon. And so, Lebanon is an area that I'm very familiar with, having lived here and being from here. So with our initial trainings, we did do in person, but we quickly realized that there's the whole point of Natakallam is that we're online, right? So even part of our recruitment process, we test the internet connection of the language partners through the internet process, through the interview process. And so, it is a combination, I would say, of really in person, but also really leveraging the internet and what you can do over Skype and all these new technologies, Facebook community groups and Slack, etc. But I would say more than the physical presence, what was key to our success is being culturally entirely aware of the community we're working with, knowing Syrians, knowing the Arab world, understanding the intricacies. My co-founder and I, especially with a background kind of in conflict and peace and conflict and understanding human rights issues, etc., was really critical to understanding and to also building trust within the language partners, who we have a really great relationship with, because that's important, I think, and understanding where they're coming from was really critical to our launch. And as we continue to grow, we are targeting, when we're switching to other languages, we are also making sure that our staff is familiar with the culture and the conflicts from which people are coming with. Yeah. And I would say that that's been key to our success.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned before as well the fact that you partnered with universities. I know you've also partnered with Yale, which are some of the biggest names, right, in the academic sector. How important, or what kind of importance did you give to partners from the early beginnings?
Yeah, I mean, so Natakallam, there's implementation partners, there's academic partners. Yeah. We are really, Natakallam is driven by impact. Our goal is first and foremost impact in a sustainable way, and ideally that can become profitable, which would ensure, in our opinion, greater growth and greater impact overall. So, for me, even before working in part of Natakallam, just being on the outside, having been having done internships with the UN or having been involved in NGOs, having been a journalist, for me, there is one of the biggest failures of the humanitarian sector, I think, until recently, has been lack of partnerships. And I think that over the past and the recent years, there's been a push for partnerships. There's been a push for partnerships across the sectors, public, private, et cetera. And I think that's wonderful. And I believe that partnerships are really what will drive impact. And so I think from the get-go, with that thought in mind, like we've always been open to leveraging partnerships and not trying to do something that's not our expertise when someone else can do it. So, for example, deciding to partner with an NGO on the ground, especially local NGOs, which have a whole other set of versatility because they're not subject to these crazy, long budgetary restrictions or policy restrictions. They're much more nimble already than large NGOs. Realizing where each of us can fit in the puzzle to actually build that puzzle, the puzzle of impact, if you want, right? Yeah. So we've always had a belief in partnerships from the implementation perspective, and then the logical idea we had when Natakallam came to life was, of course, the academic opportunities, because that's where people are learning. That's where people are learning languages. That's where people are learning about politics, about history. And my idea for Natakallam was also related to my experience when I was in high school studying Spanish.
Yeah.
And when I would study Spanish, I would have a mandatory, and this was in the French system, I'd have to go listen to a 30-minute recording of someone speaking, not a real person, but like a recording where I would say hola and repeat and all these things. And so for me, I thought to myself, Natakallam should be the labo de langue, as you say in French. That should be the language lab.
Yeah.
If you can replace language labs in schools by real people who are getting a livelihood through this. So schools and academic partnerships were kind of already in the mix even before Natakallam came to life. And especially my co-founder, his parents are both professors. So we were kind of already in that space. And so, it was a very natural decision for us to bring this to classrooms in the university level, and then afterwards to the school level. And of course, again, as our background is about changing, in the conflict resolution space, etc., the other importance for us is when you do this, you're also changing the narrative. You're letting students directly engage with refugees, hear their story, hear about the politics, hear about what it means to flee. So it's, Natakallam is so rich, right? Because it's like, in one instance, it's an income to refugees. In the other, it's like raising awareness about what it is to be refugees. In the other, it's breaking down stereotypes and actually an alternate source of news. Because if you're watching the news and that's your only source of information about the Syrian conflict or many other things, it's a very one-sided and limited view, right? Yeah. So academic partnerships were something we thought of from the beginning. And the funniest thing is that our first partnership was actually the professor who reached out to us. So he found out about Natakallam, and a lot of professors who are also very engaged and engaged on human rights issues related to the conflict, I would say, they were really excited about Natakallam. And so professors reached out to us at the beginning, and we secured 2 small partnerships with that. And then from then on, we internally developed a whole plan for outreach to universities. And so that's been kind of a double, both them coming to us and writing to us and then us going, reaching out to them and building, the capacity to be partnered with the university, because it's very different to take on a whole classroom, to shadow the professor's curriculum, to deal with, oftentimes crazy, busy schedules, mostly of, especially American students on campuses.
Yeah.
So that's been very interesting. And, it's very funny because some of the Syrian language partners, they're like, yeah, we now understand, the students are always canceling because they have, another activity and then extracurricular. And then, so it's even, funnily, the Syrians are telling us that they've learned so much also about kind of the quote unquote Western life and how they live and the communication style and things like that. Yale, we have a partnership with Yale, with Columbia. We have with Duke, and some partnerships are language, and others are actually more about, we've partnered with anthropology departments and classrooms that are studying migration. So it's a really wonderful way, especially in the U.S., where I believe that Americans are very far from the conflict and from the situation. Europe is slightly different. It's easier to kind of, maybe interact with Syrians and Afghans and, sub-Saharan African communities of migrants and refugees because they're coming more easily to Europe. But the US is different, I think. So it's harder even to be able to get an actual interaction.
Right.
One-on-one.
Now, I'm going to move on to a little bit of a tough talk here, because in social business, sometimes it's hard to make things clear when it comes to partnerships, what kinds of partnerships, and how they can leverage a source of revenue, basically. So how do you go about that talk? How do you approach corporate partners, for example?
I mean, corporate partners are on the kind of, we're slowly going into that. We have more, corporate partners, corporate clients I'm assuming you mean like clients, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, I believe that Natakallam has an interesting offer for corporations because there are corporations who need language services as part of their professional training for their staff.
Yeah.
And with our more recent development of translation services, which, Natakallam has now developed a whole translation department where we've identified and support refugees who have a translation background and then can deliver translation services. So I think, when we're approaching corporate clients, of course, the idea is that, we're not only offering you a service that you would need, but the service you would be getting would also be having a very powerful social impact.
Right.
So I would say, that's, and I believe that we're living in an era where giving back and being a responsible corporation is very important. So timing again has been key. We're in this era of the conscious consumer.
Yeah.
I saw some article about millennials now really caring about, like using products or, engaging or buying from companies that are socially responsible. So I think, it's, that's part of it. And it's, I don't think it's a one way, when everything is a negotiation, right? When you're going to discuss, it's you have to show what is in it for them and what is in it for you.
Right. Now, what are the steps that you take when you need to identify which partners, can provide the best value, and in turn that you can provide the best value for? And what are the steps to actually secure those partnerships?
It's you kind of study what's out there. You can follow certain organizations, understand their needs, understand their previous footprint in social impact. Of course, there are many companies that are joining things like the Tent Partnership, which is, to show your support to refugees by employing refugees. So, you obviously take a look at who seems to care about what you're working on, who might have an interest, who might also have a regional interest, who is, of course, when we were focused originally on the Middle East, a lot of interest came from people from that part of the world and organizations from that part of the world. So, you use a bit of common sense and judgment, and you also, you kind of just have to throw yourself out there, and, you're probably going to get a lot of no's, but you do it, and you don't let the no bring you down and think that it's over. So you have to keep, keep pushing. And I also, I think at Natakallam, we're very transparent, and we're very, we believe that everything should be a fair and balanced, like there should be a gain for all ends, right?
Yeah.
All ends of those involved in the partnership and the negotiation. So, and of course, like there's that chicken and egg, like, can we go and reach out to this big company that might need a big amount of work, and can we deliver that yet? Are we at that level? And, a lot of, you listen to a lot of podcasts about founders, and they very often will have said that they said yes to something they didn't have the capacity to do, and then they they didn't sleep for a week and they managed to get it done. And I think that's kind of the hustle of being an entrepreneur and having to take these risks and accept that you're going to sacrifice some things at the beginning. And it might not turn out, of course, but it also might be what helps you actually come to life and really, grow from that first agreement. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah. I was thinking for many startups and for many founders who are at the early stages and, you know, especially migrant entrepreneurs that want to approach a big sponsor or a big partner, they may not know how to take those first steps. So I was wondering, what advice would you give them to start that conversation, to approach the brand or the company or the academic institution, right? And start the conversation.
Yeah, well, one kind of definitely unquestionable advantage is if you have a personal relationship to the company or someone within the company or the academic partnership. So, of course, and someone who can introduce you, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, cold calls and cold calling, emailing, things like that is definitely harder to get through to that first conversation. Yeah. So, I mean, if from a very practical perspective, I would say leverage your network, find the personal contact within there. And I'm sure, I don't think that's rocket science, but I would say that definitely it's not, it's like definitely proven to be the change factor for us when we've reached out. And be persistent, keep knocking, keep reminding, keep checking in, keep sending emails. We're still trying to, it's been about 2 years. We're still trying to secure this partnership. I won't name it because it's still not confirmed, but you know, it's persistence and, you know, you do at one point decide, okay, maybe it's not worth it anymore, but timing, of course, figuring out, okay, this is in the news and this is really hyped up right now. People care about this topic. So now I'm going to go back and knock on this person's door. So I think it's a combination of, network, personability, persistence, and also just accepting that sometimes you should just drop it and move on to the next.
Right. I think I personally, I'm learning a lot about the need to follow up, right? Sometimes we let things fall through the cracks because we don't follow up. And I think it's very important to just keep reminding, you know, that person you're in touch with and following up on them because they won't.
Absolutely. And I actually, one thing I've always been a very, kind of a principle of mine is communication and responding and answering emails, confirming receipt of emails, even a one-word email just to acknowledge. Like I've been raised that way, and I believe that's so important. But I realize today the amount of email and just the way we live with like our WhatsApp and then our Skype and then our Slack and just the millions of constant bombardment of emails and information and people reaching out. It's just so much easier to get lost in people in the messages, in the email, in your inbox. And for me, I actually now, I realize I'm not able to always answer emails. And of course, I'm learning myself how to manage myself and my role and my responsibilities. But I really actually appreciate when people follow up. I actually thank them. I'm not annoyed. I'm actually thankful. And I'm like, thank you so much for actually reminding me that. And that's actually a very recent change, because I used to think I'm not gonna bother the person and keep sending them messages and follow-ups. But I realized that actually in today's world, it's actually sometimes very important, and the other person might actually appreciate it. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's oftentimes a win-win situation, right? And it just takes that reminder to get things done. And I'm surprised, and I'm very inspiring very, very frequently by entrepreneurs like yourself that, keep following up for 2 years to get a partner on board. I think that's also that's a big lesson on persistence.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I don't even realize how crazy long that is, but yes, we're still working on it.
Yeah, right. Now, speaking of keeping someone or a partner engaged, how do you work within your company culture to keep, your language partners engaged, but also your clients engaged, the learners engaged? Do you have some kind of strategy for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we, Natakalam has a designated language partner, so we call them conversation partner, CP for short, a CP community manager. Netzakelem is different from many language platforms in the sense that we're very active in the matchmaking between the language partner and the language student. We're not a marketplace, so you don't go to Netzakelem and pick your partner.
Yeah.
You don't have the profiles of the CPs listed side by side, and you can see how many stars, how many students they've taught, what they look like, what their hobbies are. We don't do that. When we first started, first of all, our biggest concern was protecting the language partners. Many Syrians have some security concerns.
Yeah.
So, that was the biggest thing for us was obviously that. And we were very sensitive to that. And I know that other organizations that might have tried to do something similar did not realize how, important that is. And again, the context from which people are fleeing violence. But we also, because we're driven by impact, we want to make sure as much as possible that an even number of conversation partners are getting the hours of work evenly distributed. Yeah. So, if you take a normal marketplace, you always will see like that tutor who did 1,000 hours, or I don't know how many hours, 5 stars, and you will naturally kind of maybe select that person again because you're like, okay, guarantee they're going to be good. I have the evidence that they've trained me well. And so that was another one of our concerns, in addition to the security concerns we had at the beginning, that, we want to make sure that when we bring on language partners, they're not just on a platform and they might get lucky if someone selects to work with them. We go that extra mile. We'll look at language students, their information, their schedule, their interests. I mean, we've gone as far as like people signing up and they're like, I work with Doctors Without Borders. I need to do medical language in Arabic because I'll be going to Lesbos to volunteer. So we'll go out of our way and we'll have like Syrians who are nurses. So we'll pair them together because they can talk about the medical language together. So, we're figuring out different ways to keep that and keep growing because it is an amount of work that's additional, but looking at different technologies that can help facilitate that. But we do go that extra mile to make sure that happens. So there is a very personalized dimension to the work we're doing. And the language partners are, they're part of our team. They're not like us. They're like staff. We consult with them. We check in with them. We ask for their feedback. We try to engage them on when we're making videos about Netzakelem. So I think, that personal involvement, that personal component is very important. So I think that's been one of the reasons. And, for example, other organizations might onboard a lot of refugees we're very careful to not tell a refugee or a language partner or a displaced person that they got the job if we can't guarantee them a certain amount, because it's very hard. A lot of profiles are coming to us, and Netzakelem could be their only sign of access to a livelihood and hope. And so we can't just bring them on. And, I can hear other organizations that are like, we have a roster of 2,000 refugees. And, what percent of those are actually making money? It's very nuanced. It's much more complex. And so Netzakelem might not have this crazy number of refugees that we've worked with, but we have language partners who have been with us for 3 years and a half. Yeah. More than 3 years and a half, who've had a constant monthly reliable income through their work with Netzakelem. And that's deep impact. That's real impact. And I believe that in the social entrepreneurship and social enterprise space, it's really important for people to do due diligence and to look at real impact, because numbers can be very easily misunderstood and misread.
Yeah, definitely. Well, just before we go, Aline, what would be your number one advice for an entrepreneur that wants to start up and that comes from a different country? So he's a migrant or a newcomer or a refugee. What do you think is the key to having a successful start?
So I think that the key to having a successful startup is, first of all, the research you'll do before launching. If you have an idea, you want to make sure that there isn't, that it's not already been done. And I think that one of the things I see is a lot of reinventing of the wheel, which I'm not sure is the most strategic. So I tend to be more, if you are very passionate about something and you see it out there, maybe you can go talk to them and maybe you can join or develop something and become an entrepreneur within an organization. You know, the entrepreneurship space is exciting, and we're seeing amazing things happen. But I think it's also important to not glorify it without knowing why we're glorifying and realizing what some of the risks are, right? So that would be my first, like really kind of make sure that your product or your idea, there is a space out there for it, and it's, just really kind of see what's out there and see whether there's something added that you can bring to the table before. And then after that, I would say risks, resilience, and like being able to take setbacks and get back up if you really believe. And, I think it's funny. I have a friend who just, she has a startup. I won't go into details, but she's doing pretty well and she's getting lots of attention. And she called me up and she's like, I didn't tell anyone yet, but I am dropping this. I don't want to do this anymore because I don't believe in the impact. And I think it's just become a hype.
Yeah.
And I actually don't even see, so, you have to believe in it, in the work that you're doing, and be convinced, and don't just do it because, because of outside factors. Like, it really has to come from you. And, so I don't know if that's enough, advice.
Definitely.
And partnerships, I really believe in partnerships, again, and I would say, relationships is everything, like human relationships and contact. And from our experience at Netzakelem, like we have, my co-founder is the more just the quieter one, and I'm the more like social. And so, getting that balance also, because, it's having a team of people with different skill sets. But of course, one of them has to have very good interpersonal, go-getter, high risk, willing to take high risks type of personality.
Right. And as you said, partnerships are key. I think a lot of startups that are very successful, just like yourself, they owe it to a lot of partners that have, this is the way to reach your, to reach customers, to reach your impact, whether it is with NGOs, with universities. So I think, your example speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I would say that there was a part of luck, really good timing, So I think there's so many factors that come into play. So we we were lucky that we came to life at a time where people cared about what we were doing, and that helped us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Aline. It's been really, really inspiring to have you.
Thank you, Valentina, for having me, and it was great being able to share.
You like what you hear? You should definitely follow us on your favorite platform. So next time you're on Instagram or Facebook, type Startups Without Borders and check out all the videos, the stories, and the resources for you to become a legend.